We are going to talk about COVID-19 lab diagnosis. I'm Dr. Prashant, and I'm looking after a North Zone for Sterling Acurus, and I'm working molecular field from last 12 years. So it is very important that how infective diseases are are even important at this level. A year back in all molecular meets, we were talking of population genetics and new panels on NGS. But when a virus came and the way it affects, we have to understand that we simply cannot neglect the infective part of diagnosis. And over here, molecular is playing a very major role. So we'll be talking about it during the presentation. As we all know that total cases have crossed across world somewhere around 30 crores, and in India the documented cases are somewhere around 57 lakhs. So even if we take that testing, what are being tested and what is there in on ground, a difference of 10 times, that also makes India total somewhere around 5 to 7 crores with a population of 130 crores. I don't feel that we are off this COVID for at least next 3 to 4 months. And just with the best of the estimates, not even the 10% of population has been infected up till now. And that has burdened our healthcare system to this level. So just imagine when this number rises. And by any means, since it is already in type B and type C cities, their infra is very poor in terms of medical needs which are required when these cases get complicated. We are going to have we may end with a bad phase. So test, track and treat is very, very important. So we all at this platform are diagnosticians. So we need to understand that. So I've defined my scope of presentation as understanding the SARS-CoV-2 organism, its detection and diagnosis of the infection. At present, gold standard technique is PCR, so I'll stick more to it so that I can throw some lights, my experiences, overall experiences, what studies are saying, and the prognostic and severity markers in COVID. See, we all know that there's a difference between infection and the disease, and with a highly contagious infection, which may progress to a very severe disease. But since contagious, every patient cannot be called on and worked upon directly by doctors. So a lot of teleconsult as well as virtual consult are to be done. So if all the prognostic and severity markers of blood are very, very important. So I'll stress on those things. So starting with understanding of coronaviruses. See, COVs are something which cause infection across species, and we have COVs infecting human species from pretty long. So precisely, there are 7 COV species which mainly infect humans. 4 of them are which does not cause epidemic, and they are endemic practically in this Asia part of Hong Kong, Singapore. They are namely human CoV OC43, HKU1, 229E, and NL63. I'll not go into the whole microbiological classification of coronaviruses, but still we need to know that when we study the virus, there is something called as genus, there is something called as family, there is the realm, then order, subgenus, and then species. Why it is important to know is because genetic structure comes from the same realm. So the cross reactivity of genetic signatures as well as antibodies. See, antibodies are going to be against the antigens, and antigens are going to be structural or non-structural proteins. So we have to understand that part also. So that's why I've just taken this part. So what you have to understand is that coronavirus is practically is a virus which is of SARS-CoV-2 is the part which we are dealing right now, which is from the subgenus Sarbecovirus. Sarbecovirus is the virus, all viruses have same envelope protein. So if you get any Sarbecovirus, you are going to get an E gene positive. So only on E gene we cannot give the diagnosis. In my experience, up till now, I've got 7 cases in which I had only E gene, fairly positive even on repeated testing, and not getting RDI. So there's and when you see it in under electron microscope, it looks like a crown. There are spikes on it. So that jughead crown is the visibility which you get into an electron microscopy. So from there, the corona word comes. And going further, you need to know the physical structure as well as the genetic structure. In physical structure, I have already told that it has a crown spiked protein. There's a membrane protein. There is a envelope protein. There is a spike protein, and then there is a genome. This nucleocapsid protein binds the genome to the this envelope. So you have protein as well as the genome. These protein will help us in getting a antigen for antigen test, antigen for the antigen and antibody testing, and the genome part is obviously for our PCR or other molecular techniques. So when you see the genetic structure, there are structural proteins as well as non-structural proteins. Coming to COVID, you should know that there are 16 NSPs. Whenever we define a primer through which we should diagnose, we try to take the most conserved region. So of these ORF, these all NSPs जो है non-structural proteins हैं, these are the part of open reading frames ORFs. So of that, NSP12 is RDRP gene from which, or helicase from which one probe is taken. Another are from, others are from structural, whether it is S, E or N. E is an envelope protein common across all sarbecovirus. So you may get a cross-reactivity. Spike protein is the main protein which forms the basis of the pathogenesis of this whole virus of affecting the lungs. It mediates the ACE2 binding. I'm not going too deep into that pathophysiology because right now I'll limit to the scope of this discussion. So going ahead, if we have to detect SARS-CoV-2, yeah, for any infection, for diagnosing any infection, our aim is to either to establish the diagnosis and to predict its clinical course. So what all methods we have? We have direct methods, like it may be a microscopy in case of malaria, but it's a viral disease, so we don't have that scope. It can be a histo, but it is not there in scope as far as SARS-CoV-2 is concerned. So what we want is detecting organism by its unique signature. Signature can be genetic or protein based, or rather I should say antigen based, because you get antigen from lipopolysaccharides also. So genetic signatures, being an RNA virus, we have to take that RNA part, or then we have antibodies which are indirect, along with clinical features with radiological and inflammatory markers. So to sum up, what we are doing is this is SARS-CoV-2. Either we are doing its epidemiological surveillance through PCR or CoV-2 antibodies or antigen. So we are doing both by direct as well as indirect method. We are doing diagnosis by RT-PCR or antigen. Both are direct methods. Then we are doing staging, prognostication, therapeutic monitoring. These practically are done mainly by indirect methods. There are direct methods. We do follow CT values. And if we are doing BAL, we are monitoring for plasma therapy. It is very important to know that how patient is responding, because once patient is already in cytokine storm, we don't have, the viral load has not much to contribute. So it is before that only they have to monitor that whether they want to give plasma therapy or not. So staging, prognostication, and therapeutic monitoring are the important part. Where indirect plays a role, whether how much time CRP is doubling, whether D-dimer is coming or not, whether we can think thrombosis is going to play a role over the next few days, whether we are getting a high IL-6, that means that there is an impending cytokine storm. So those are the important things in early infection, ferritin being an acute phase reactant, how fast it is rising. Then recovery is obviously by antibodies, so which is an indirect method, and poor fellows may have a bad outcome of death. So what we have to discuss? We have to discuss the direct methods as well as the indirect methods. Direct methods, what we are using in practice, there are very many. I'll not get into details of other direct methods also, like viral culture and all. But what we need to know is nucleic acid amplification. What we do, most common is real-time PCR. Then point of care is there, like TrueNat and GeneXpert, CBNAT. They also are practically PCRs, but more simplified at cost of some sensitivity. Not very high, but there is some cost. Then you have LAMP, which is isothermal nucleic acid amplification based methods. We have CRISPR. You all must have heard of Faluda, read about it in what Tata is bringing to India now. And it's a very promising technique. Overall, CRISPR is a very promising technique. How it will span out in infective diagnosis is something which we have to see. There are CRISPR-based tests coming all over the world. In US, used in India as far as infective diagnosis is concerned, but that is a high throughput test. And what we can do with NGS is we can also monitor the variations coming. See, virus overall and they're notorious to bring changes. So that changes are very, very, if monitored timely, we can change the probes if there is change in conserved region, or so that we don't give false negative. So there you can have a role of NGS, but as far as mass diagnosis, there we are sitting right now, our mainstay will remain real-time PCR. Then obviously rapid antigen test is there. It's a good test in terms of turnaround time, easy way. What is wrong is that it is positive only when there is high viral load, that is low CT. In practical experience, what we have seen, any CT above 24, 25 comes negative with the antigen test. So, and patient is infective, very much infective till 30. And why this? And in a country like India, where urbanization is to kilometer in every stories, every house living in. So we should think a test which is highly sensitive. So that goes against antigen test, and we should be cautious in its usage. Going forward, routine investigations which we do for better management of COVID-19 suspects are or COVID-19 positive. We have to do baseline testing of CBC with ESR, CRP, LDH, ferritin, liver and kidney functions, along with diabetes, along with uncontrolled diabetes. They both are separate risk factors. So for all COVID test patients, HbA1c should be seen at the very first day, whether it's an uncontrolled diabetes case or a controlled diabetes case. Then obviously D-dimer and IL-6. We all know that pro-inflammatory cytokines play a pivotal role in this pathophysiology of lung damage in patients affected by COVID-19. So looking for pro-inflammatory cytokine is an important thing, but their measurement requires a lot of precision at pre-analytical level. If you are doing it in a non-gel separated tube, you may get a false elevated things. I'll discuss it further in my presentation. So now getting close to what is RT-PCR. See, RT-PCR is real-time or reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. It is a mainstay technology. WHO and ICMR both have recommended this. This is a gold standard. See, if I say antigen is 50% sensitivity, that 50% sensitivity I am judging against RT-PCR, which itself is 70% sensitive because of stage of disease, timing of disease. As Dr. Saini told in the very starting, that timing of RT-PCR is also important. RT-PCR is diagnosed when disease is wherein you may have a lower load or you may have a negative RT-PCR in affected cases if it is done late in the stage of disease when disease has moved to lower respiratory tract. His site is nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal swab, BAL is there. There are being trials done on CSF also, but not much success. Then genetic target amplification basis HESTA, we all know that. So what is the workflow? We take the swab. The RNA is either manually extracted or through an automated extractor. We all know that with this level of load, automated extractors helps a lot. But you have to compare and see your extraction quality of automated RNA with a real way, because there are so many extractors have come and they're not that good. Basically, in extraction, we know there are two types of technology. You can have a magnetic bead, you can have a column based. Overall, column based gives better results, but there are good magnetic bead also. So I'll not get into that part, but yes, this is a very important step. If you are not getting a good extraction, see what we do. We are taking a sample. What we do in extraction, we extract all the genetic materials which are there in the sample, whether it is a human RNA or it is viral RNA. Once that is extracted, the same is being subjected to thermocycler, where the probes to specific genome part of virals as well as internal control of human RNA bind to it and shows the amplification. So like any other laboratory test, what we need to understand is that in this also there is a pre-analytical phase, that is the sample collection. There is an analytical phase that involves extraction to PCR, then a post-analytical phase. So we need to understand this, that we should have a robust process at all levels. So what happened? I'll first take the analytical part. In analytical part, you get the RNA, then the reverse transcriptase enzyme turns first cDNA is formed, and that cDNA goes into thermocycler with a repeated cycles of extension and annealing, and finally forms the amplified DNA sample, and that is being read by that fluorophore signals are read by the machine, and same is expressed in the graphical form. So practically it is 100% specific. If our probes are fine, it is 100% specific. And the genes which we are using, as I told you, E gene, it is for sarbecovirus. Then confirmatory ORF1b, RDRP, and N. Then internal control, that RNase is the housekeeping gene. I believe many of you are doing testing, so very well versed about the endogenous and exogenous control, as well as you must have seen the reports having RNSP. It is very, very important that we take this as important part, because in recommendation, it is clearly mentioned that we should use the endogenous control. Try to understand the process. When you are taking a sample, you are scrubbing the human epithelial cells also. So when you are taking human epithelial cells, that means your swab has gone inside, and that part of sample has come from the right place. If a person, if a phlebo or the whosoever is collecting is out of fear because of the contagiousness of this disease, hasn't put that properly either in the oropharynx or nasopharynx, you will have a lower RNase-P as an endogenous control. If it is an exogenous RNase-P, then it will come properly because it has been spiked afterwards. So that time you are judging just the quality of extraction you are striking at the time of extraction. But if it is there in the kit itself as an endogenous control, then you got to know that your sample collection is proper. If your RNase-P is going out, that is with different, because what you will do is you will not get the peaks of E, RDRPN or whatsoever you are using. You might go with this, go ahead with the negative report, but the report is not negative. The sample collection is faulty. So it is very, very important. And if there is no visible amplification, you should dilute the sample in region, because PCR inhibitor is something very, very important, and it always remains. With this technology, you cannot eliminate inhibitors. They are always there. And multiple targets should be correlated in higher CT values, because there is cross inhibition. So these are very important points and working points. See, these points and analytical contamination, these are the main problems which all PCR labs are facing right now, and we should be very cautious about these things. So limitation and challenges of RT-PCR are that there are pre-analytical factors like lack of identification or misidentification, inadequate specimen collection, handling, transfer. So if the lack of identification, misidentification is there, you cannot do much about it. What you can do is you set up a better process. Inadequate specimen collection, handling, transfer, and storage. This you can check by your endogenous control if you are using a kit with endogenous control. Because right now the requirement is so high, so everything has got the eligibility, but we should go by the recommended criteria. And recommended criteria says that we should use a kit with endogenous control. Collection of inadequate material, again a problem. Presence of interfering substance, so you need to run in a dilution. Pipetting errors, sample contamination, testing in patients receiving antiretroviral therapy. So these are very important things. And plus days of symptom onset. Infection in initial phases, you might not get. If it is out of that, you may miss it. So false negativity is attributed to low viral loads in initial phase of infection as well as final phase of infection. Then obviously the analytical factors will always remain: instrument malfunctioning, person has not done it properly, non-specific PCR annealing, misinterpretation of expression profiles. These are all important points. So I have taken in short the LAMP also, that is the isothermal amplification part. This is something which is talked about a lot. The good part is that it can be done as a POCT. It does not release the thermocycler. So in it, what we do is there's a forward internal primer and a backward internal primer, and they are attached in loop. You have seen the circus that there are two jokers or there are two acrobats who do on Lasium one is holding the hand, then the foot, hand, foot, hand, foot. So that goes in circle. So practically the lamp work like that. So that loops are formed and then they are detected. So the good part is you don't need a thermocycle for it. But obviously you need the nucleic acid, so extraction part is to be done. So BSL-2 grade lab is required here also. And same with CRISPR also. You take a swab, you extract the viral RNA, then you will do a lamp in it. And then see in CRISPR technology, there is a guiding RNA, gRNA, we all call it gRNA. So that is integrated with Cas12, that is the bacterial enzyme, which will cut the gene. And so it will cut from the probe which we are detecting, and probe will bind to it, and then we get the signal. So it can be done like this, chromatographic. So that is great about it. Time is the manual extraction take around 10 to 15-20 minutes depending on what type of extraction system you're using. And then it can be directly subjected to test wise directly to the chromatographic strips. The last test which has become the mainstay and right now is the antigen test. Antigen test detects protein which are structural or functional components of a pathogen and are thus very specific to that pathogen. So if the target antigen is present in sufficient concentration, you will get a visually detectable signal on the test strip, typically with results ready in 15 minutes. So we use a high specificity antigen test. So they're very specific, but not as sensitive as molecular tests. So we have to understand this. Negative results should be analyzed together with additional patient factors such as COVID-19 exposure history, clinical symptoms, and if any such thing is present, RT-PCR testing is recommended and should be done. What are the antigens being used in COVID testing? So we are using pathogen-specific antigens. There are three main antigens which are being used. One is the spike protein, as I've shown you the structure already, the spikes which are there in the right? Then nucleocapsid protein, the protein which binds the genomic RNA along with the viral envelope. Then receptor binding domain, that is the RBD, which is a part of structural protein only. The ACE2, which forms the pathogenesis part. So RBD is also being used. This ends up with the direct things. Coming to indirect, first is the antibody. We all know that serology testing is an important part in all infections. Wherever we have a serology testing, we feel a bit comfortable that we know what we are dealing with. And right now we are getting into that phase that there are so many asymptomatic patients. So at workplaces and so many places, the antibody testing are being used. In India, we are allowed only with IgG. And that is the right way of going because specificity of IgM right now is still to be established. And with that, it is very, very important that we take up only IgG right now. There are, in India, only ELISA is allowed right now, not the chromatographic ones. So, and the CLIA one. So practically what happens is there is a coated antigen, then a blood sample is along with conjugate is there, and we read the color diagram. Like in any other ELISA or CLIA, methodology remains the same. You have to have a coated antigen, and for the same, when sample is added, sample will react, and then the conjugate will react with the antigen antibody, and there will be a color development, which will be red. So coming directly to the concern of the cross reactivity. See, I told you earlier also in the presentation when I was talking of the SARS-CoV-2 physical structure, that there are 7 types of coronaviruses that naturally infect humans. So SARS-CoV-2 and MERS-CoV are the one, or SARS-CoV, these are the 3 which are called the epidemic, but there are 4 others which are routinely there. Although their incidence in India is not that high, but they are there in Singapore and other places. But still we don't know. So the cross immunity reactivity mainly targets the viral 1AB polyprotein and S protein. So these are consistently a high sequence similarity between low pathogenic human coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2. So thus cross reactivity is an important part to understand that we may have a false positive COVID-19 antibody. This we have to keep in mind. We don't know right now in India how much we will have, but that remains a problem. Coming to other indirect things, to sum up, we need what all we do when we are dealing with a case of COVID-19. We do CBC, we do blood gases, and ICU patient, we do albumin, LFTs, KFTs, and coagulation profile, D-dimer, prothrombin, ProCal to see the any additive active infections, CRP for the viral infection, sepsis, then ferritin as a early marker, and IL-6 for the impending or running cytokine storm syndrome. So there are very many severity scorings which are running. CAL score is something which is commonly being used, and the C stands for comorbidity, A stands for age, L stands for lymphocyte count, and the second L is for LDH. So age over 60 years is a risk factor. Then presence of at least one comorbidity, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, asthma, chronic lung disease, kidney disease, liver disease, any immunocompromised disease like HIV or malignancy. These all forms a comorbidity. There are scoring, three scores given. Then lymphocyte count, if it is going lower than 1 into 10⁻⁹ per liter, or LDH is going over 400. There are other markers which are being used are D-dimer and IL-6. So these are very important. And as labs, we'll be getting these very often for next 3 to 4 months at least. So decreased serum albumin, elevated CRP, elevated LDH, lymphopenia, and high ESR. All these things have been seen in different studies, and the prevalence have gone like CRP, LDH, and albumin, all are seen very commonly, and these are important things to be looked into. So lymphopenia, neutrophilia, elevated liver enzymes, elevated LDH, CRP and ferritin levels, they are important things to be done. There is a timeline which we understand that it is that RT-PCR is the earliest to come, followed by an antigen protein antibodies. Then there is a viral RNA, IgM is there, followed by IgG. What we are right now looking is that antibodies are not there forever. They are going as early as 45 days, and late as there are cases where 6 months have gone, but the antibodies are persisting. So going to the pathophysiology of D-dimer, I am taking this specially because D-dimer is not so common test done at many labs, but it is right now a very common test as far as COVID is concerned. The reason why there is an elevated D-dimer is partially explained. The reason is that D-dimer is there in endothelial and the lining cells of lung also. So it is not elevated just as a marker of thrombosis. It is elevated as a pro-inflammatory cytokine. So what we have seen that D-dimer is not correlating with directly with thrombosis, but it is directly correlating with the inflammation part. So we cannot ignore if a patient has got a high D-dimer along with high CRP. Whether to start with anticoagulant is something a clinical decision, but yes, it is coming not just as a coagulation marker, it is coming as an inflammatory marker also. So elevated baseline D-dimer levels are associated with inflammation COVID-19 and have a limited predictive value for thrombosis. In the treatment of COVID-19 patient, D-dimer should be observed dynamically. That is very, very important. D-dimer and CRP practically are forming base right now. CRP doubling time is very, very important. So to sum up, biochemical markers in COVID-19, you have hematological markers, you have biochemical markers, you have coagulation marker, you have inflammatory marker, potential new markers, biomarkers. I would have loved to talk about homocysteine, NLRs, angiotensins, albumin, but right now I have to rush up. So going to hematological markers, you have increased TLC with neutrophil count. This is reduced lymphocyte count. In biochemical markers, your LFT, KFTs are deranged. There's reduced protein. Coagulation markers, you may have PT D-dimer increase with all inflammatory biomarkers going up. To summarize, IL-6, D-dimer, LDH, CRP, followed by beyond D-dimer, PT and FT. These are the most important things. Surrogate markers of ferritin, CRP should be done on daily Thursday. And IL-6 is getting increased interest because of tocilizumab as an therapy. So that is all about the indirect markers and direct markers of COVID-19 lab diagnosis. Thank you all.